Okay, we're going to call this meeting to order. If everybody could rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Mr. Scott, if you could give us roll call.
Yes, Miss Olson.
Here.
Miss Bell. Sorry.
Here. She's here.
Okay. Mrs. Godfrey.
Here.
Mrs. Leone.
Here.
Mr. Miller. Here. Miss Olson.
Here.
Mr. Scott here. Mr. Strobel.
Here.
Mrs. Thompson.
Here.
All present.
Okay, just for anybody who missed it, Ms. Bell is here. She's attending via phone. And we have superintendent's report. Dr. Cooper.
Thank you, Madam President. Okay, this month we're celebrating, we're toward the end of it, but we're celebrating our Board of School Directors. And in the words of our sixth President of the United States, John Quincy Adams, if your actions inspire others to dream more, learn more, do more, and become more, you are a leader. Since this month is the Board School Director Appreciation Month, I want to thank my colleagues for your service to the students and families of our Blazer learning community and for displaying the leadership necessary to assist in making our district schools places that make our community stakeholders proud. And as a small token of our appreciation for your service to the community, at your seats today, you would have found a DB medallion that was made by a 3D printer in from our high school, the tech and engineering classroom. So they were made by the students. We wanted to provide you with a small token of appreciation in your service for our students and our families. So thank you. Next is just kind of provide an update on our COVID cases that we continue to monitor. And we had seen an increase in the number of cases after we came out of the winter break. It was very similar to what we had seen when we came out of the fall break. And as a result, there was some requisite quarantines that had to happen. That too, we saw a direct proportional increase from the fall and the winter break. And the positive news is that in the past week or so, they've started to become less within a district, also less across the county and across the state. The positivity rate in our district on the website that we monitor that tracks that information has decreased about 10% in the past week. So we are headed in the right direction with regards to that. However, we'll continue to monitor our cases and appropriately act based on our guidance from the Department of Health and Department of Ed, continuing to navigate the pandemic here. One of the other items too I wanted to put in front of the board is we had started having conversations administratively as a possible target date to start our discussions on offering in-person learning every day at our secondary level as we approach and perhaps return from the spring break, which is the beginning of April. That does seem like we're pretty far out, but it will be here before you know it. So we felt that it was important for us to just kind of put that out there in our minds and continue as we continue to navigate the pandemic and take a look at our cases and continue to monitor as we get closer to that date. Now, I don't want to say that it's set in stone that that's something that we're looking to come back to an in-person every day. Basically, what that would be doing at our secondary levels would be combining the AB groups together at our secondary buildings. The model would be similar, providing what is happening and taking place in our elementary buildings right now. But again, we're just starting those conversations, and we'll continue monitoring that. Obviously, we'd still offer our DBDL, part of our learning options, and our virtual academy learning options. So just wanted to throw that date out to you. Also applied for a $95,000 grant from PCCD to increase the number of Logitech devices for our professional staff to the original amount that we were originally looking to do when we embarked upon this at the start of the school year. I believe we were looking at about 150 to 155 of them. We were able to get 125 of them, so this will round us out to get us to the number that we were originally looking for. And the last item has to do with the release of the new ESSER 2 funds. The anticipated allocation, this has to do with the COVID relief, is for our district, it's anticipated to be a little on the upside of $1.4 million with a use-by date of September 2023. I know in a previous committee meeting in our curriculum, we talked about our summer academic connections programs in the summer to kind of fill the gaps of our learning gaps that our students experience. This year, we ran it last summer as a result of the emergency closure of in-person instruction to our students. It was very well attended. The intent is to provide that again this summer, and if possible, look for the next summer as well. And we believe that we will be allowed to use these funds for something like that. But I just want to let the board know that's what we're looking for. So that concludes my report, Madam President. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Cooper. Any of the board have any questions about anything Dr. Cooper talked about right now? I've seen none. Procedures for public participation are up on the screen to your left. They haven't changed. So we could have any presentations by the public on any agenda item. Seeing none. Announcements, agenda edits. I have an agenda edit to put under new business. I'd like to appoint Kristen Thompson to the technology committee, replacing Tanya Bell. And that'll be item 9A1. All right. Moving on to the consent items. We have, under consent, we have items 3A, 1 through 7. Do I have a motion for those? Mr. Strobel, Ms. Leone second. Any discussion to have on any of the items under there? Okay, hearing none. Mr. Scott, can we have a roll call vote?
Yes, Mrs. Albright,
Yes.
Mrs. Bell,
Yes.
Mrs. Godfrey,
Yes.
Mrs. Leone,
Yes.
Mr. Miller,
Yes.
Mr. Scott, yes. Mr. Strobel,
Yes.
Mrs. Thompson,
Yes.
Mrs. Olson.
Yes. Okay, moving on to personnel consent, number 4. We have a 4A, 1 through 2. Yes, through 2 to 3. Do I have a motion for those?
I'll make that motion.
Mr. Scott, do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Mr. Strobel? Any comments, questions, concerns from the board on anything under personnel? Hearing none. Mr. Scott, can we have a roll call vote?
Mrs. Bell,
Yes.
Mrs. Godfrey,
Yes.
Mrs. Leone, Mr. Miller,
Yes.
Mr. Scott, yes. Mr. Strobel,
Yes.
Mrs. Thompson,
Yes.
Mrs. Albright, Mrs. Olson.
Yes.
All yeses.
Okay, under finance, could I get a motion for 5A, 1 through 6, excluding number 4?
I'll make that motion.
Mr. Strobel, can I get a second?
I'll make that.
Mr. Scott. So we'll deal with number 4 in just a second. Anybody have any comments, questions about 1, 2, 3, 5, or 6? I think the audit was discussed in finance. All the other expenditures were talked about at either extracurricular or facilities. Anybody have any concerns about any of those? Hearing none? Okay, Mr. Scott?
Mrs. Albright,
Yes.
Mrs. Bell,
Yes.
Mrs. Leone,
Yes.
Mrs. Godfrey,
Yes.
Mr. Scott, yes. Mr. Miller,
Yes.
Mr. Strobel,
Yes.
Mrs. Thompson,
Yes.
Miss Olson.
Yes. Okay, so for number 4, Finance 5A4, I'd like to make this motion and put in to be determined. Dr. Cooper and Mr. Steve Miller to serve on the TIF committee. And can I get a motion for that?
Make that motion.
Mr. Strobel, can I get a second?
I'll make it.
Okay, so now that we have a motion on the floor, Mr. Flatley, who you met 2 weeks ago, is back, and this time he has brought Jeremy Zaborowski. Is it close enough? Okay. From the Berks County Industrial Development Authority. That's who he's been working for on this project. They're here to answer any lingering questions about the TIF process or this project that we have since that have not been answered, or things that you wanted to discuss before we vote on it. Because essentially, if we vote yes on this item, we are, appointing members to the TIF, and so we're agreeing to take part. I do have one question. Have you presented to Union Township yet? Oh, not Union, Amity Township.
Informally, but we're
Okay.
scheduled to go in on the 17th. I wanted to come in here. Obviously, you're the most important piece of it, so
Sure.
I wanted to make sure that we had the support of the school district, and we're formally presenting to the school district on the 17th.
Okay.
But we have had informal conversations, and so far I haven't received any negative feedback. They're in full support of it.
Okay. Any questions from anybody else?
Next question, as far as timing, you're presenting on the 17th to the township, and if they approve, what's next?
Yeah, so tonight, obviously, I asked Jeremy to attend, just so you get to put a
You can
face
come up.
to the name. And Jeremy can probably speak to the timing as far as the TIF process goes. But thank you again for the opportunity to present during the last meeting. And I thought it was important for Jeremy to be here, so.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I apologize for not being able to attend last time. In the abundance of caution, I went under quarantine for some mild symptoms. Fortunately, they ended up being negative, and so
We
we're
absolutely
fine.
didn't want you here.
But
So,
I really do appreciate
that's
it.
good to see you now.
Yes. I don't want to be that guy that shows up and then finds out and then
Right.
when I get a phone call. So I'm Jeremy Zaborowski. I'm the Executive Director of Berks County Industrial Development Authority. We're a quasi-government agency created by the county to do really 3 things. Land development, so we develop industrial parks. The second is tax-exempt financing. The third is bridge financing. What we're here to talk about tonight is the tax-exempt financing, so the tax increment financing. I believe that Tom provided a good explanation of the program and how it works last time. Other projects that we've done akin to this have been Exeter Commons at Perkiomen. The Target and shopping center that went in there could not be built but for the improvements at the intersection, which at the time was one of the most dangerous intersections in the state. And so we saw that as a worthwhile endeavor to participate and guide the TIF process. Another project we did was the Cabela's up in Hamburg as well. It also needed transportation infrastructure, but for that it couldn't go in. And since going in, as you've seen, there's a number of stores up there, and it's a really vibrant space. So we're looking at this project from the same kind of lens, that the infrastructure that's needed for this project is good for this project, but we also see it as beneficial to the rest of the land in that area that's been in zone commercial and industrial for some time, but has been unable to take off because of lack of utilities and the financial gap that's there. And so we're running this TIF process in order to establish the financing that would get the infrastructure there, that would support this project as well as others in the area. So this step tonight is the first step in that process. It does not obligate the school district to anything but to sit at the table and discuss if a TIF is feasible and if a TIF agreement can be come to between the taxing bodies. And so, as Tom said, we'll be talking to, formally we'll be talking to the township on February 17th. We've informally talked with the county as well, and the county is supportive of the project. The next step with them will also be to take it for their consent agenda at one of their commissioner meetings. And after that, we'll have a committee made up of all three taxing bodies. The committee's goal is really kind of threefold. One is to identify and verify that the amount needed for the TIF, the amount of money that would be financed, is appropriate. Two, that the TIF area is appropriate, so we decide where do we draw the boundaries. You know, do we add other parcels of land around it? Do we keep it smaller? That's the second portion that the TIF committee will decide. And then the third would be each taxing body's relative participation. What percentage of their increment would they be willing to see applied to this project for the benefit that they get from the remaining increment and from the value of the potential growth of that space down the road. So those are really the three things that you'll be sitting and meeting with us on, and I'll be facilitating that conversation. And so, as I said, this is that first step in the process to approve moving forward with that. It does not obligate you to anything except sitting at the table and deciding whether or not it makes sense, or to tell us to go pound sand. So if you have any other questions, I'm glad to fill in any other
I
blanks.
think Mr. Miller had talked about the timing, so assuming that where we go from here.
Yes, the timing would be once all three taxing bodies have it approved, then we'll have Zoom meetings within the next month or two. I don't expect the TIF committee to take longer than a couple of months unless there's significant disagreement, which I don't anticipate.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay. Thank you. So with those questions answered, could I get a roll call vote?
Yes, Mrs. Albright.
Yes.
Mrs. Bell.
Yes.
Mrs. Godfrey.
Yes.
Mrs. Leone.
Yes.
Mr. Miller.
Yes?
Mr. Scott, yes. Mr. Strobel.
Yes.
Mrs. Thompson.
Yes.
Miss Olson.
Yes.
All yeses.
Thank you, gentlemen, for coming today.
Yes, thank you for your time.
You are excused unless you want to stay, but I do appreciate you making the time to come out.
Of course, thank you so much for your time and consideration.
Okay, so under number 6, personnel added consent items, 6A, 1 through 3. Is that correct? Can I get a motion for that?
So moved.
And a second.
I'll second.
Ms. Leone, a second. One thing I do, well, I'm sure we'll still hear from him for a little while, but one thing I do want to point out that one of our fearless leaders, Mr. McKnight, who has had many hats or actually 2 major hats. Just lots of extraneous jobs involved since he's been with the district. But going to be retiring by the end of the year, and we thank you for your service. I know this isn't your only stop along the road in education, but we were happy to be part of the journey for you. If there are there any comments or questions on anything else under personnel? If seeing none, okay, Mr. Scott, we have a vote?
Yes. Mrs. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Strobel?
Yes.
Mr. Scott, yes. Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mrs. Leone?
Yes.
Mrs. Godfrey?
Yes.
Mrs. Albright?
Yes.
Mrs. Bell?
Yes.
Oh, yes.
Except that I didn't get to say yes.
You didn't get to say that.
Yes,
See, I keep having to switch this thing around for certain people here. Mrs. Olson?
yes.
All right.
For posterity, somebody's going to look at that in a year and say, why'd you say no?
It's always Mrs. Albright first.
It only gets switched once and then it goes back, so I'm not really sure what.
I don't know what's going on.
You're always number one.
Okay, so under programs, added consent, 7A1, we have a motion for that. Mr. Strobel, do I have a second?
I'll make it.
Okay, Mr. Scott. This is for the formation of the esports club at the high school. Did anybody have any lingering questions, comments? I know we discussed it briefly at the committee of the whole. Okay. So, can we get a vote? Mr. Scott? I didn't know your name.
Mrs. Albright.
Yes.
First time I asked you. Mrs. Bell.
Yes.
Mrs. Godfrey.
Yes.
Mrs. Leone.
Yes.
Mr. Miller.
Yes.
Mr. Scott, yes. Mr. Strobel.
Yes.
Mrs. Thompson.
Yes.
And Miss Olson.
Yes.
All right.
Okay, so under old business, just the approval of minutes. 8A, 1 and 2. Can I have a motion for that? I'll make it. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Mr. Miller? Any comments, concerns, edits? Mr. Scott?
Mrs. Albright. Mrs. Bell.
Yes.
Mrs. Godfrey.
Yes.
Mrs. Leone.
Yes.
Mr. Miller.
Yes.
Mr. Scott, yes. Mr. Strobel.
Yes.
Mrs. Thompson.
Yes.
And Mrs. Olson.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, then under new business, just that agenda edit, 9A1, to appoint Ms. Thompson to the Technology Committee. Do I have a motion for that?
I'll make it.
Mr. Strobel, do I have a second?
I'll make it.
Mr. Scott,
Trying to catch up with him.
any comments, questions? Can I get a quick vote?
Mrs. Albright.
Yes.
Mrs. Bell.
Yes.
Mrs. Godfrey.
Yes.
Mrs. Leone.
Yes.
Mr. Miller.
Yes.
Mr. Scott, yes. Mr. Strobel.
Yes.
Mrs. Thompson.
Yes.
Mrs. Olson.
Yes. Okay, so do we have any presentation by the public on any issue? Okay, seeing none, we don't have for the first time in a while, we don't have an executive session afterwards, which I'm sure will make my fellow board members very happy. So do I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion. Second.
And we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Who made the first motion?
Mrs. Albright?
Mrs. Albright, didn't I know?